Evening, everyone. Hello. So I thought we would. Oh, thanks for the sound check, Em, as well. The sound check was actually required today. It's much more rarely needed, but occasionally it is. So I thought we'd talk today about what we can expect when Parliament returns. Not necessarily immediately when Parliament returns, but how, again, we're expecting things to shape up in terms of the major battles against Labour from all of the parties potentially. But I suppose most commonly it would be the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats. I've got a slightly different setup, I will just warn you today, because I treated myself with the release of the new WoW expansion, a new curved monitor. So things may be a little bit different. You'll have to let me know how it goes on. But anyway, so effectively, we'll just go through some general points on where I'm going to start off with where I think the Conservatives and the Lib Dems will mostly focus on. And then we'll go through some questions because there's some very related questions in there as well. And then on to whatever people want to discuss. So first of all, for the Conservatives, you may think, well, it's a little bit tricky because there's a leadership contest and there are some significant differences. And so therefore, we won't know what their specific direction is going to be on lots of policies until that leadership contest is over. And even then, I mean, if we look back at the last Labour leadership contest, it can still take some time and there'll have to be some adaptations. But there are some emerging themes, I would say. Looking, and I'm spending quite a lot of time, because I expected to be doing a lot of videos on the Tory leadership contest this month, and then other things happened. So we'll get back onto that. But one thing is, it sounds to me like they're not giving up on the idea. Say a bit nearer to the mic. So this is what I was worried about. I actually can't. This is why I may have to install. I may have to go back to the old microphone at some point. Let me just show you just very quickly. So this is a mixed bag. So I got myself a new monitor. This is what it looks like. So you can see. I didn't just get a curved monitor, which, by the way, is a terrible idea just for general office stuff. But although I use this computer a lot for doing the stuff for this channel, it's the one I get for gaming. So I don't put it on expenses or anything. This is like that. So I got a nice curved monitor. But I also got myself a monitor arm, which is terrible for doing normal office stuff, but glorious for gaming. But what it means is that the microphone is can't go over. It used to go over the monitor. The monitor was much lower down. The other monitor I had was much lower down, and it went over it. This one can't go over it. So that, I'm afraid, is where it is. But I had thought of this, and I know some people have had issues with this monitor in the past, and it's not helped by the fact that because it's software control, it's a really good monitor for live streaming. But it tends to be on the quiet side even when you've got the sound turned up. And because it's software controlled, sometimes other software turns the volume down, which is annoying. So I may have to go to the other microphone. Long story short, there we go. But yeah, so in terms of common themes with the Conservatives, in terms of across all of the candidates, I'm seeing no deviation from the line that the Rwanda plan would have been marvellous and it would have been the magic bullet that solves all the asylum problems. And because the Tories tend to lump in asylum with all other immigration issues, by extension, they're going to try and suggest it would solve pretty much all immigration issues unless someone asks them a careful question. The second thing is they all seem to be pushing this idea of dropping human rights laws. I suppose the main exception there might be Mel Stride, but he's not going to win. Of all of the 6 contenders, I mean, I have in my own mind who's probably more likely than others, but Mel Stride is like the zero chance one. So they're all wedded to that idea. If anyone, and I'll suggest, I thought maybe Tom Tugendhat, because he's like a One Nation Tory, more moderate, centre-right type of thing. I might have imagined, well, he's sort of saying that to appeal to the members, but actually, if he did win, that's a big if, I don't think so, but if he did win, then maybe he slowly steers the party towards, well, because his position arguably is, if we need to leave it, if we find it's blocking us from doing things. But actually, he's recently been talking about things he's written and said years and years ago in favour of leaving bits or all of the European Convention on Human Rights. And you know what? He has for a long time. So it seems to me whoever wins is going to carry on wedding the party to this idea of dropping human rights laws. And then third, on Brexit, I see no real discussion on Brexit at all, which could mean one of two things. One, it might mean that they actually just don't want to talk about Brexit for a while, with a view to adopting a more pragmatic, let a bit of dust settle, and then hope Labour, because Labour are going to take a more pragmatic approach to Brexit anyway. Let Labour do that, and then maybe they themselves turn towards a more pragmatic attitude towards it. Or, which is probably more likely, they all intend to maintain a hard Brexit position within the Tory party. And the reason they're not talking about Brexit is because they just don't want to answer any questions on it, because it has just been a shit show. But a shit show they would like to carry on with, basically. And then in terms of the Lib Dems, I know exactly what the Lib Dems are going to do. It's actually quite tricky. I may do a separate video on this, on the dilemma that the Lib Dems have. I think I've already talked it a little bit, but from another angle this time. The Lib Dems will be going on rural affairs big time, because I don't know how many people have paid attention here. Although Parliament's been on recess and things like that, what has been sorting out the musical chairs of select committees has been going on. Select committees are very, very important. And who becomes the chair of a select committee is very important. Obviously, we know Labour are going to grab most of them because they got most of the MPs, right? But the Lib Dems have wangled themselves the rural affairs, the chair of the rural affairs select committee. And the Lib Dems, of course, I mean, the weird thing about the Lib Dems is they'll need to be seen as a strong, effective voice of opposition. So you'd think, oh, so that means a lot of Labour bashing, stuff like that. And it's like, well, because they're not in competition with Labour, they're in competition with the Conservatives. And if you think about those sorts of areas where they're in competition with the Conservatives, rural affairs is going to be really important. So the Lib Dems have done pretty well to grab that one. That's going to be key for them. So in terms of that, I think you can expect quite a bit of NIMBYism from the Lib Dems in terms of Labour's housing policies, in terms of the opposition there. But I think you're also going to see quite a lot of attempts at constructive criticism, because, and I'll do this in more detail in another video, if you think about it, what do the Lib Dems want? They've won a load of seats. They'd like to win more. They'd at least like to retain what they've got, but they'd like to win more. How do they win more? They win more by demonstrating that they can, it's no good, they need to be a big, powerful voice in Parliament for those areas. But what they'd ideally like to be able to say is, we've actually effected changes. What they don't want is to be such an effective opposition that people think, oh yeah, this Labour government's a bit crap, isn't it? Because what happens then? People think, oh, this Labour government's no good, so we need a different government. What's the different government? Conservative government, at which point the Lib Dems lose all those seats as people vote Tory in those areas again. So what the Lib Dems want is they want voters to vote Lib Dem over Conservative. But the way to do that is not opposing the Conservatives, because the Conservatives aren't in government. It's to constructively oppose Labour. In other words, they need those voters to think, oh yeah, this Labour government's better than a Conservative government. But by having a Labour MP, a Lib Dem MP, we are giving that better Labour government a steer in better directions on some areas that they wouldn't have done if the Lib Dems weren't going on at them. So that's where I think the Lib Dems will be. But anyway, one Angry Pagan there saying, bet your PC will be epic for playing Arkville. I don't play that, but I do not skimp when it comes to my computer for gaming purposes. But anyway, we'll go back to the top. We'll crack on with some of these other things that have come in, and then go over comments that people will be busily putting in, I suppose, at the moment over this one. Oh, there's various people saying, hope the wedding went well. I have not had a wedding. That's next week. It's in a few days' time. My finger is currently unadorned with metal still. No, we're a week early on that one. I hope it goes well, though, because it's basically a social event. I don't like social events. But anyway, someone said congratulations in advance. Yes, you are correct. It is in advance. James there saying, by the end of this parliamentary session, are we going to count on one hand how many times a Reform MP will enter the House of Commons? I mean, they are going to be in just to... They think... So, no, they're going to go in. I don't know how often, like, Nigel Farage will bother going in. I'm sure he will try to go in for high-profile things. But as he recognises that he's not really going to get much of a say... This is how I would see it probably for Nigel Farage. Not so much in Clacton on Fridays as in Westminster, because what's the benefit to any of them actually bothering to turn up? Like, Lee Anderson might as well turn up. He's not one of the bored millionaires. He's got nothing else to do. So what are the rest going to do? All they want to do is turn up and say their piece and clip it and share it around social media. Well, in order to do that, it makes no difference whether they're saying it in PMQs, where they'll only get to ask a question every now and then anyway, because it'll be a lottery. They don't get an automatic question in PMQs, which means they go into the raffle. Obviously, they need to turn up in order to be in that raffle, or they need to at least suggest that they are. They need to be in Parliament that day to put their names into the raffle. So they may turn up for PMQs. Whether they're in attendance at PMQs is another matter, but they'll have to turn up to Westminster on Wednesdays in order to be put down on the raffle if they want any questions at all. But beyond that, it makes no difference whether they're saying what they're saying in a packed house or on a Friday afternoon where no sod's there because they've gone back to their constituencies. So I think, and that's where it's easier to be able to do something. So I think they're more likely just to, wherever they think they'll be able to stand up and ask a question or say something, that's probably going to be quieter times, that's what they'll do. Because all they want is just to clip it, share it around social media and make out that they're being this big, effective voice in Parliament. But other than that, Reform UK are going to do nothing. So could we please give a shout out to Labour members for the NEC elections, Anne Black. I mean, okay, I've mentioned her. That's not. I'm vaguely familiar with her. She does work on the Women's Committee, doesn't she? But I'm not. It's not an endorsement, by the way. I don't know. I'm not endorsing any particular candidate at this moment because I haven't paid close attention this year, if I'm honest. But there we go. I've mentioned Anne. Right. What can Labour do about the energy price cap for this winter? It's unlikely GB Energy will be up and running by then. Well, it certainly won't now. Absolutely nothing. This is baked in. We've known about this. It's not a surprise. We've known about this. In fact, you know, when you've had these Tories going on about, and they're still doing it now. Jake Berry was doing it like yesterday or the day before or something. And he was saying, he was like, Liz Truss made him party chair, or was it Boris Johnson? He's a former Tory MP. He was a bit of an idiot. And he was going, oh, Rishi Sunak, I can't believe how stupid he was having this election. We should have had the election in autumn. It's like, I'm not doing another video debunking this nonsense. It was, you know, autumn would have been way worse for them. If they'd have held the election in autumn, I'm going to say I think the Lib Dems would have come second. It's really that simple. And there were many reasons for that. First of all, the Rwanda plan would be completely exposed. At the moment, the Tories are able to claim that the Rwanda plan was there. It was there. We were at that final stage. We got the legislation through. It was all done, all sorted, all perfect. And yet, it was like, where's the evidence? Where's the evidence? We still hadn't got the Supreme Court saying it was legal. They hadn't put it through the courts. We hadn't had the results of any legal challenges. We had no evidence that there were any planes ready to go. We had no evidence that there was an airfield ready to go. No evidence. And it would have all been exposed because Rishi Sunak was guaranteeing flights taking off in July. So at this point, if they had not called the election then, right now, this autumn, we would have been talking about where the Tories go now that their Rwanda plan has fallen on its face. Whereas now they get to say, oh, it was just there, it was all done, it was all going to be perfect and we'd have stopped it all. And you can see that when you're reading the Tory client media, that's the line they're taking. But another reason was, and there were several, was the fact that energy prices were always slated to go up this autumn. It was already in. We knew it was happening. You know, we just didn't know exactly what the cap would be, but we knew roughly where it would be. We knew it was going up. We knew energy bills were going up. So, you know, this was already baked in. What can Labour do about it? The only thing Labour well, actually, they can't do anything because Ofgem is supposed to make this decision. All Labour could actually do, because they can't just overrule Ofgem at this point. They obviously, the guidelines for the watchdog are set by the government, but there's not been enough time for Labour to do that. So all they can actually do is do what they did a couple of years ago. The Conservatives had to do a couple of years ago. They could increase energy payments for people on very low incomes, but that would need funding. And at the moment, obviously, whatever Labour's plans are for the budget are very tight because, you know, we're having all this furore over winter fuel payments. And I think I'll have to talk about that I've already talked about it once, but I think I'll have to talk about it in a separate video with everything else that's happening now. But, you know, if you think, if Labour, because it's a politically, what do they used to say in Yes Minister, bold move. It is a politically bold move to take away anything from elderly voters. It's not as bold a move for Labour as the Conservatives, because like for the Conservatives it would be an insane policy to remove winter fuel payments for anyone. For Labour, not so much, because the Conservatives' key voters are all pensionable age, whereas for Labour it's people in their 40s and 50s. There's target voters, so basically people in work, they're not retired. So it's a much easier policy for Labour to get away with. But it's still a controversial policy that doesn't necessarily save a great deal. So, yeah, Labour will absolutely not be doing anything about these energy bills going up now. The aim will be to make sure that they're down, at least in real terms, by the next election. So, I mean, in the short answer to that one is not a thing. Someone's mentioning there the Jeremy Clarkson thing. So for those who don't know, Jeremy Clarkson is a bit of a knobhead. Unfortunately, he's from my hometown. I'm in that unfortunate position of coming from, well, it's a city now, it's a town when I was growing up, Doncaster, which doesn't really have many famous sons or daughters. And the ones it does have are not really what you would call some of the wisest or most enlightened people in history. So we don't really have people to boast about from we don't talk about people from Doncaster, because no one from Doncaster has ever done anything any good. I mean, I suppose Kevin Keegan in his professional life, but in terms of some of his views, we'd rather not talk about him as well. So, yeah, but Jeremy Clarkson, a bit of a knob. And he's opening a pub, apparently, and he's banned Keir Starmer from it, which is hilarious. Because it's like, okay, first of all, Keir Starmer doesn't live anywhere near this pub. He doesn't work anywhere near this pub. He doesn't socialise anywhere near this pub. And I'm pretty sure in saying, am I correct? Someone correct me if I'm wrong. I don't even think it's a Labour area. So I don't even think it's like the sort of place where at some point in the future, he's likely to be campaigning and nip in for a pint. Bear in mind, Starmer has, since becoming Labour leader, famously been chucked out of a pub. If you recall, in 2020, he went into a pub as part of just canvassing and things like that, and he got chucked out. He was blamed for the lockdown, so he has got experience of being chucked out of pubs, at least one pub. But I don't think this is a pub he's going to get chucked out of, because I can't imagine any scenario where he would ever go anywhere near it. So it's just Jeremy Clarkson basically shooting off his mouth as he usually does. But there it is. But there we go. One of you saying, my MP Caroline Voden said she would challenge Labour on the badger cull licences. Is she in favour of more badger culling? Because because Labour have gone the other way to the Tories in terms of the old badger culls. I know it is one of those things. So on rural areas, it is going to be one of those key things. Farmers would rather you err on the side of cull more than you need to type of thing. I'm on the side of, look, I appreciate the difficulty for farmers, but at the end of the day, we have to, it's part of our wildlife. We don't just commit genocide against animals just because they're inconvenient, is my view on that one. So I'm sort of, run into conflict with quite a lot of farmers on that one. But there it is. But things like that, yes, inevitably. I mean, for For Lib Dems, that is inevitably what they're going to do. That's what you would do. But where I think they'll really want to try and focus is on areas where they may get Labour to change their mind on, or just like change a little bit. That's where they're going to be able to show their their mettle. Because what they remember, it's this weird situation. The Lib Dems need to oppose or challenge Labour, should we say? Challenge Labour. And it will include a fair dose of opposition as well, obviously. But what they're really doing is they're not like when Labour are challenging the Tories, like when the Tories were in power and Labour were challenging them, Labour were presenting themselves to the public as Tories bad, we should be in their place. When the Lib Dems do it, they want the voters to think, oh, Labour are actually better staying in government, but the Lib Dems are better being on the opposition benches than the Tories, type of thing. So they actually have a tougher job. And when you consider the media completely ignores them, it's a really tough gig the Lib Dems have got. They're going to have to be very, very smart about it. But anyway. Hang on, I missed one somewhere. Do I think the honeymoon period for Labour is bust? And do I think the Tory strategy will turn its attention to law and order, consider what a failure Brexit immigration was under the Tories? No, I don't think the honeymoon period is at all over for Labour. First of all, most voters, just empirically, most voters understand that Labour haven't had time to do anything. Yes, the riots thing was a bit of a baptism of fire. But ultimately, in terms of, that's basically over now. Like, it's sort of over. I mean, the people who were very badly affected by the riots, it's not over for them, of course. So people whose communities were attacked, people who are part of the groups of people who were specifically targeted, you know, Muslims or just generally people of colour, quite frankly. In fact, ironically, white Muslims are probably going around going, well, no one knows I'm a Muslim, I'm fine. They'll be feeling better off than someone who's like black but a Christian. So the people who will feel that they were being very, very specifically targeted, it's not over for them, and it won't be for some time. But in terms of the general public, it's basically done and dusted now. And it's back to what are those key issues, which is the state of the economy, cost of living crisis, NHS waiting lists, other public services, housing, usual things. And they know that Labour haven't actually started and hadn't had time to deliver on those things. So the honeymoon period can be, unless Labour really makes a bad error, can reliably be expected to continue into next year. The budget arguably is a big one. The way that needs to be presented is quite key, but at the same time, it's not important in terms of that. But what I would also say is this. Now, we are getting limited polling at the moment because there's not a lot of people commissioning polls right now, and pollsters themselves are also still hard at work, like, you know, amending models and so on with the election results. But what polling there is actually shows that they first of all had a situation where Labour and Starmer, approval for them actually increased after the election. Because we suddenly had a government that was doing things. It was very energetic. Like Rishi Sunak kept saying, oh yeah, I'm working all these hours, I'm doing loads of things. It's like, we can't see it. Where's the evidence? Whereas as soon as Labour came in, it was like, right, we're going to change this and this and this and this and this. And there is an extent to which that always seems to happen when you've had a change of government, because they want to change everything. But at the same time, we also had this, it was very stable. There was no like childishness or anything like that. So approval went up. Then the riots hit, approval went down because the country was on fire. Since the riots, what we've actually seen with the latest polling, it's gone back up again. So yeah, it's no, as far as I can tell from, and I am hesitant at the moment because there isn't a large body of polling work out there, apart from on specific issues. But as far as I can tell, Labour are doing, in terms of public approval, really, they're doing fine, particularly when you consider that in the first part of a parliamentary cycle, I mentioned this as a side issue in my second video today, you've got, you know, all of your controversial stuff, all of your stuff that might put people's backs up, you do early anyway. So you take the hit in the first year as a new government on anything that people may not approve of. as long as you're not screwing voters over, because then you lose them forever. You know, you must feel that what you're doing is in line with what you said you would do. Which is why when Rachel Reeves presents this budget, she can get away with a budget, like politically, whether it's a good idea is another matter, but she can politically get away with a budget that puts people's noses out of joint, as long as people can't get to say, oh, you broke that promise. I mean, the Telegraph and the Tories will, but as long as people who actually look at the manifesto and go, oh yeah, it is sort of in line with that, then it's fine. And because what they expect is to get what they want is they want the approval ratings later on in the parliamentary cycle anyway. It's no good to them now. There's no elections now. The next shot is next May for the local elections. And even then, they're probably not going to lose wholesale because it's a year in. I actually still think the honeymoon period could well be in place for the next local elections even. I think, you know, people could still be... The honeymoon period lasts as long as people are willing to give them time. But there we go. Need to switch from a national electric pricing model to a zonal pricing model. Don't think the nodal is politically viable. I mean, I'm not sure about that. There are some things that I do think we definitely need to sort out. We need to get rid of standing charges because that's ridiculous now. Certainly. And like with anything, my default position is if you're talking about an essential service that people need, so I'll tell you what I would... So obviously what I'm going to say is I don't want it to be privatised because then you're adding profit into it. I'll tell you what I think would be an interesting thing to put in, because I also understand, you know, people say, oh, just nationalise it, then nationalise it. So, well, so what you're talking about is losing the next election. So nationalising, yes, where's your plan for it? If your plan is just to massively pile on national debt, so you lose the next election, then actually you're not wanting it nationalised, you want it privatised. Because what would happen is you would pay off shareholders for a tidy sum, because you can't just steal it, whack on debt when actually the cost of servicing that debt is already now super high. Then you'll lose the next election because the Tories will go, okay, they privatised it. You've got this massive national debt. Is your electricity any better? Is it cheaper? The answer will be no, because a government that nationalises it that way is going to have to then start to spend money on paying back what they used to buy it out in the first place. So bills won't go down and the service won't go up to begin with. It will later, but not to begin with. And so you lose the election, and then what do the Tories do? They sell it back off to those same shareholders, but at a lower rate. You know, remember Royal Mail? So, yeah. So you have to do it on the slope. But I'll tell you what I would like to see. I would like to see people being informed about the impact of privatisation. So what if, for example, you know how... And you can do this. Remember, you know, when, like in this country, but other countries as well, what did they do when the government decided it wanted to dissuade people from smoking? What did it do? Public health warnings on packets of cigarettes. You know, smoking can harm your health, smoking kills. And then pictures of like tumours and stuff like that and knackered lungs on it to really be off-putting. Well, why not make it so that with your energy bills, it has to say... You know how you're... So I'm going to keep going on tangents. On your council tax bill, it breaks it down for you. It says so much of your council tax has been spent on this and then so much is on the police, so much is on the fire service, so much is on... It breaks it down into different areas of expenditure. Do the same for energy bills. Do the same for energy bills. Make them break it down by how much is profit, how much is going into research and development, how much is going on to staffing costs, and how much is going on to other essential costs for delivering the service. Why not do that? Then they can get people to discuss how much of their bill is down to profit. And maybe that profit's more than it should be. That's what I would do. Anyway, sorry, I'm going off on a tangent and I'm not getting through these questions. Duncan saying they're a new member here. Thanks for your alert, no problem. A bit premature to the EU mobility visa. No, I was absolutely not. The government ruled it out again on Thursday night. They did not. The Guardian said they did. The Financial Times said they did in their headline, not in the article. And this is the point I actually tried to make in that video. It is true that the Financial Times and Guardian brought out their articles after I'd done the video, and part of me was thinking, should I just re-record it to mention it? But no, because it was the same point I was making. They say they've ruled it out in the headlines, but they haven't ruled it out. They're basically lying at this point. The government haven't. What the government have actually said is, we're going to go ahead. So, and it's like I said in the video, from Labour's point of view, what they want is the veterinary deal, and they want a couple of other things. What the EU want is the youth mobility deal. Now, Labour will also be in favour of the youth mobility deal, but they cannot say they are, because then imagine the meeting. Labour, whoever it is, David Lammy, whoever, I don't know who would go along, might be Nick Thomas Simmons. But whichever minister goes along, and the meeting with like von der Leyen or Maros Shevchovich, whichever commissioner is going to deal with it. I would actually imagine they'll give Maros Shevchovich this one off, because he must be traumatised after dealing with the Tories, poor fella. But they say to them, we try and say to them, we want this, we'd like this veterinary deal, and an agreement on qualifications, mutual recognition of qualifications. That would be a big deal for us. And the EU say, okay, so what you're going to give in return? If Labour try and say, well, you want this youth mobility deal. If Labour have said it's a good idea, they'll say, but you also want that, so that's not giving us anything, because you want it as well. So Labour have to pretend they're not that bothered about it. And that's exactly what they've said. They haven't ruled it out. All Labour have actually said, including in this latest Guardian and Financial Times piece, is all they've said is, we're not doing any work on it, and we're not bringing freedom of movement back. Well, they're not doing any work on it because it's an EU proposal, and it hasn't, and there's been no talks, so they don't need to do any work on it. They don't need to consider it because there's been no formal proposal. There hasn't been any talks take place. The second thing about freedom of movement, this youth mobility deal is not freedom of movement. I would look at it as a step towards making freedom of movement more palatable again, but it's not freedom of movement. And the third thing to note is, we already have youth mobility deals with other countries. So not even the Tories are opposed to youth mobility deals at all. So it's an absolute nonsense to suggest that Labour would work against it anyway. But, the fact that the Times were able to report, granted it was very off the record and anonymous, but, they've talked to someone who said, yeah, we're going to have to give in on this one. I mean, when they say give in, what they mean is pretend to give in on it. That's all it is. Do you know what? It's going to happen, and when it happens, I am going to be insufferable, because I'm going to be bringing up those headlines from The Guardian, anyone else, and it's going to be the biggest, loudest I told you so I've ever done. But anyway, there it is. Right, let's try and catch up. I'll try and start more from the nearer one. Sorry, I missed some out. Will net zero in the 2030 switch to EVs be a big issue at the next election, as about a third of homes are unable to charge cars at home? Well, obviously you can't bring it in if that's still the case. That is key. It will be a big issue at the next election regardless. The reason it'll be a big issue at the next election is either Labour will have delivered this massive logistics project, in which case they get to say, we've delivered this huge project. The Tories never delivered anything. Or, if we're not ready for it, they can't do it. It's really that simple. And when you're saying, we won't, most people can't charge at home right now, that has to be dealt with. That's one of the, there's actually two major things that have to be dealt with. There's a whole list of things that really, but two major things from the voters' point of view. First, the capacity to charge, like where I am, like I can have something installed here if I got an electric car, and there's some parts of the country that are very well served, and there's some part. So I understand when if you're living in an area where it's like, oh, well, I've got an electric car and it's fine. But in some, like where I am, it wouldn't be fine. If I can't charge it at home, there are limited places where I can actually charge the car. So I can't just use my car. If I got an electric car, I couldn't use it like I do my current car. Actually, for most purposes, I technically can, because I do relatively short runs. But when I do longer runs, I can't just use it like I do a normal car, because the infrastructure isn't in place in enough places. I would have to properly plan it out, and I would have to go out of my way, ironically, and make the journey time much longer to manage, because there are some places where it's absolutely crap. But as you also say, you at the very least, because most people just do short hops, so at the very least you need to be able to do charging at home. But the other thing is we need to massively boost the capacity of the grid. The national grid could not take it. If everyone went out and bought or not even everyone, if everyone who bought a new car, because that's what matters, if everyone who bought a new car from now on, it was an electric or a hybrid, they could not, the grid could not take it. We'd have blackouts. So that's got to be dealt with as well. The fact that Labour, see, remember, Labour haven't just said, well, we'll see. We still want to aim for 2030, but we'll have to see now that the Tories have basically sat on their hands. The fact that they're saying, no, 2030, means that they are confident they've got a plan to deliver all this. But anyway, Film News said, has Priti Patel grown a heart? I suspect not. I suspect it's... But it says, what's her game plan? Personally, I think she's positioned herself as more moderate, so when the Tory leader crashes and burns, she can sweep into. I agree. I don't really know in Priti Patel's case. I think she's, you know, I mean, I describe various obnoxious Tories in various terms. I've never described Priti Patel as being fundamentally stupid or bad at politics. I just think she's a terrible politician, that's all. And a pretty bad human being. But in terms of her game plan, so for people who don't know, Priti Patel has ironically been she's been in this bizarre position recently of like defending Black Lives Matter protesters and attacking the rioters. Whereas a lot of people have talked about two-tier police and said, no. The Black Lives Matter protests were absolutely fine. Those people were basically just blocking streets. So the policing in that case was absolutely no problem. And there's been like other things as well, where she seems to be taking a bit of a different tone to what you would expect of someone who was trying to win the far right vote. But I think partly it's because on immigration, most especially, you know, she's she's effectively been saying actually immigration was fine. It wasn't like ridiculous numbers. But you've got to remember, she was Home Secretary, but she was also Home Secretary who introduced our sovereign independent immigration system. So any talk on her part about immigration having been too high after Brexit would come down to her. So you could read it as her being defensive and not wanting anyone to be able to say she cocked it up, because she is entirely responsible for our post-Brexit immigration. I mean, in reality, she'll have been following some directions from Boris Johnson, but we also know Boris Johnson is fundamentally lazy. He probably did genuinely leave it largely to Priti Patel to sort out. So she's responsible for that. So I think some of it comes from that. But in terms of her long-term plan, she may have a long-term plan. I would have thought, though, that she was in a much stronger position now than she would have been, that she would be in the future. Because I think the problem is, so if we work on the assumption that whoever wins the leadership contest is, let's say they last the full parliament, which is not a given, but let's say the Tories decide on a bit of stability and try not to bring their leaders down, even though it will not take that many MPs now to at least force a confidence vote. They're probably going to lose the next election. I mean, we can't ever be certain. I certainly don't want to get complacent, but they're probably going to lose the next election, right? Now, if they do lose the next election, then they need another leader. I just think the longer they leave it, the less likely they are to want to go back to a former... They'll start to see that they need the new faces, I think. I think they're going to start to see that they'll need the new faces and not the... not harking back to the past failed model. So I think Priti Patel's best shot is probably now. Now, in her own mind, who knows? In her own mind, maybe she does think she just needs to like establish a position, find a niche, let whoever wins, and then just be ready to sweep back in at the next time. But, you know, these things often do change quite a bit. But we will see, won't we? S-Facts there saying, you've said previously that far right can be reined in via addressing cost of living. Do I think existing biases need to be addressed? Oh yeah, don't get me wrong. There's a whole heap of things that lead to the sort of the far right populism, and far right populism specifically. It's just that. So the way I look at it, if you think about the riots as being like a really visible example of this, so ultimately what stopped the riots was, I mean, there were a few things in there and lots of people taking credit, but ultimately most of the, if it was, because you had different cores, you had the real core of these riots, which are basically the literal Nazis, people with swastikas tattooed on their eyelids type of thing. These are actual Nazis. Some of them aren't Nazis, some of them are just deeply, deeply racist. And incredibly violent, and white supremacists. So not all white supremacists are Nazis. So you do have some, but mostly they're that sort of people. But there's not that many of them. If it was only those people that turned up to cause trouble, the police would have dealt with them. So then what you had is you also had just the people who then thought that they had an excuse to go out and cause trouble because of like the immigration issue, right? So that was another core. And then on top of it, as we found out, you just had a load of people who got drunk and thought, oh, good excuse to just to cause trouble. Like that woman who set fire to that wheelie bin and threw it into those police. She just thought she was just basically like a child who'd gone to, had had too much sugar. So some of these people just got pissed up and went to cause trouble, thinking it was just like causing trouble of a Friday night outside a pub. So what ultimately did it was the news of prison sentences, because as soon as then people, because a lot of those people, that doesn't worry the Nazis. They'll go to prison all day long. They've been in prison, most of them. It worries the people who've got like a nice job and a home life and stuff like that. And the only time they cause trouble is of a Friday night outside the pub when they're drunk. And they shouldn't even get away with that. But because they do, they just thought it was the same thing. As soon as you were telling people, if we've got you on camera, you're going to, because that's what's happened. 100% of the time, anyone that's been identified has been, if they've pleaded guilty, they've got a prison sentence. If they've not pleaded guilty, they've pleaded not guilty, they've been put on remand for trial. So they're still incarcerated. Everyone who's been charged is currently incarcerated. As soon as that message got out, then you've got, then you took away a lot of that bulk. So the nutters were still there. They were still up for causing trouble, but they recognised there weren't enough of them, which is why no trouble then happened after that point. There weren't enough of them. And I see the same thing with the far-right populism in general, even the non-violent expressions of it. They rely on a bulk of people who just they're not hateful people. They just genuinely think that their life isn't as good as it should be. And they're right on that. They're not wrong. And they've allowed themselves to feel that it's the fault of immigrants instead of billionaires, right? The usual thing. So if you make those people's lives better, if you make sure they've got access to decent housing, if you make sure they've got access to a decent job, if you make sure they've got access to the public services when they need them, if you burgle that, okay, no one wants to be burgled, but when you are, the police are going to come out. When you need medical care, that you can go to the NHS, you're not there for 7 hours for a blood test. Things like that. And that when you need an operation, you can get it within a few months, not 2 years. Things like that, you get rid of the bulk of the people. All you've got left then are the hateful people, the xenophobes, the racists, the people who are just terminally thick. That's all you've got left, and then there's not enough of them. There'll always be some. There's not enough of them. And so I see it in the same way. Oh, when Angry Pagans, they're just correcting. So my MP is against the badge call. Labour allowed 6 new licenses when they said it wouldn't. I see, okay. Darian there saying in Madeira they've got a scheme whereby people charge their cars during the day, give spare electricity back to the grid overnight to avoid the blowing out of the grid. So that would be if you produce your own electricity. That doesn't work. That doesn't work if you've just got your own charging point, because there's no electricity in it other than what comes from the grid. So you're talking about when you produce your own energy. Yeah, we have that system in this country as well. There's not enough. That's effectively part of the grid, because anything that's not used is sold. It's not sold back for as much as you pay for when it's coming the other end, mind you. But anyway, putting it to say, could we see the Tories massively overhaul the 1922 committee and leadership rules, given the low numbers needed to topple a leader currently? No, there's no sign of that, because if they'd have wanted to do that, they could have done that now. In terms of, do they boost up the way you can trigger a confidence vote? Maybe. I would say, I mean, the way the Tories handle leadership contests, and I would say actually the 1922 committee is an example of something that the Conservatives do effectively, which shows that they can do things effectively when it's in their interest. I just, so how is it that they're so useless in government? The 1922 committee is a very good idea because, first of all, it gives that, influential voice to it makes backbenchers feel that they've got a direct line to the leadership. So it's something arguably Labour could do with, just from that point of view. But also it means it takes away power from people outside of the parliamentary party who don't know enough about, some of the issues. So it's good from that point of view as well. Labour couldn't do it now, But so what would happen, I suspect, is because they're Conservative, they don't like changing things unless there's some good reason to. If they felt in the future that there was a serious risk of a hardcore group of nutters destabilising the leadership every couple of years, then I could see them changing it to... So at the moment, it's 15% of MPs needed to trigger a confidence vote after the leader's been in place for a year. So you get a year's immunity, and then it's not complete immunity, as we saw with Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, and for that matter, Rishi Sunak, but he didn't face one in the end anyway. But the risk was there. Or Theresa May, indeed. But we have... so it's 15% needed. Now, you could argue they could change the rule to be 15% or 50 MPs, whichever is the greater, to give themselves a bit of an extra cushion when they've got very few MPs, right? But I don't think they'll rush into it, because it would attract questions, wouldn't it? Because if you changed it to that rule now, it would be like, so do you fear that MPs are going to try and destabilise their own leadership? Well, you don't really want to say that. Or like it should be something that's only needed when you've got hardly any MPs. But if they did feel, if the 1922 committee felt that there was going to be a lot of argy-bargy, it was no good for the operation of the leadership to have a relatively small group of rebels being able to cause such damage, then they could easily just do something like that. 15% or 50, whichever is the greater. And Angry Pagan, they're saying, someone who commented on one of my videos said he was a proud Aryan. See, I don't get things like that. I don't just mean the white supremacy thing. I just don't get comments like that in general. Like, proud to be a thing that you put no effort into. Proud to be an Aryan. It's like, well, you're proud of your accident of birth. Well done. Okay. But I mean, people do it innocently. Like, I have the same attitude to people who say they're proud of their country. And it's like, well, people do feel pride in their country. But at the same time, it's like, it's an odd thing, because pride surely is for something you've done. I mean, there are some people who arguably could be proud of their country. They're the people that lead it. But anyway. Say, why is Reeves aping George Osborne's austerity measures when it didn't work the first time around? She's not. Austerity is when you reduce public spending. Now, if after the budget it turns out she's actually lowered the amount of public spending, okay, but that's not what's being suggested. Austerity, I don't know what people think austerity is. Literally, austerity is, are you spending less? If you're not spending less, and think about it this way, how can she be spending less when she's going to be putting up taxes? And they were always planning on putting up taxes for the Tories. They said they won't put up taxes. No, they didn't. It's in the manifesto. There's loads of places, well, there's several places where it says, in fact, I had it somewhere. Have I put it away somewhere? They, on that card they came out with, no, it's not. I don't know where it's gone. The 6 first steps. There were 6 first steps. In 3 of those first steps, it explained how they were going to put up taxes. They just said that they wouldn't put up income tax, national insurance or VAT. That's it. Anything else is fair game. But we also know that Labour are going to put up, so they were specific about which taxes they were going to put up, and we now know that they're strongly hinting that they're going to put up others as well, like capital gains tax. And so it's, yeah, so she's going to be putting taxes up on the wealthy. They shouldn't hit ordinary people, because they said they wouldn't hit ordinary people as well. So where's the money? And I know some of the money obviously is going to have to fill this hole. There is an extent to it. Some of it's going to be filling the hole in. But they've also got spending promises that they're implementing as well. Extra spending. So the bottom line is the overall level of spending is likely to go up, at which point it's not austerity by definition. Now, it is true that there are some things that need spending on that are going to be delayed, potentially for quite a long time, but potentially not for long, but certainly delayed with this budget. And people will rightly say, yeah, you shouldn't be putting off this spending, because you should just borrow more, because, you know, national debt doesn't work like personal debt. But politically, that won't work. Politically, people think that the national debt does work like their own debt. And sorry, the government has to deal with that. They have to realise that. Is Reeves going to introduce limits on child benefits that only goes to families on low incomes? Already is. I didn't know this, you know. I didn't realise this. Child benefit is actually means tested. I had no idea. Do you know how I know? Do you know how I know? Because I still need to ring them about this just to make absolutely certain. So I got a letter. So I don't have children. I've never had children. There's no one out there with my DNA. Or not down the line, only up from where I got it from. And so I've never received child benefit or anything like that. But my partner has two. They're adults now. But when I met her, at least one was still she was still getting child benefit for one of them. So HMRC wrote to me a few weeks ago to basically say, oh, we think that you might, because obviously they've linked to two tax returns together. We think that you should be paying this. I can't remember what it's called. But what happens is, right, so if you've got a child, you get child benefit. You get a certain amount of child benefit. So in theory, it's not means tested. But if you or your partner, doesn't have to be the parent even apparently, are earning above a certain amount of money, then they charge you an extra tax to take it back again. So it's like they'll give you the child benefit and then charge you a tax to take it back again. So my partner who has the children gets the child, or it's done not anymore because they're adults, got the child benefit for this period of time. But because I'm her partner, potentially, I need to ring up and find out the details, will have to pay it back. Say, I don't have children that I know of. No, I don't have children. I didn't go spreading anything about when I was younger. I don't have children. It all got bagged up if I did anything. So, yeah, I have... so child benefit is already means tested. It's just instead of means testing it in the normal way, what they do is instead is they give you the child benefit and then they charge you an amount of tax equal to that child benefit. Whoever's on... And the amount of money you have to be on is not like ridiculously high. It's not like you know, average, but it's not ridiculously high either. So it's already done. The Tories have already done that. They've just done it in the sneaky... Well, I don't know who introduced it because I'd never heard of it until I got this letter. It may have been in place for years for all I know. But I have an inkling. I looked it up and I think it was the Tories that did it. Anyway, right, going on to one angry pagan. If Labour are going to help with the climate change and biodiversity, the deer overpopulation problem will have to be dealt with. Not enough are willing to hunt. Wolves and bears need to come back. Haven't they already started to introduce wolves in Scotland? I think they've already started to do that. I'm not sure about bears, if I'm honest. Because it's one of those things like we did, you know, it's in today's terms, we wouldn't support it today, but we did have a bit of a habit in Britain over, you know, many centuries of effectively murdering everything that's harmful in this country, apart from the weather. We made the weather. So what we did is we removed all the harmful animals, and then we invited the climate to destroy us instead. But you know, there we go. You know, we're like the anti-Australia in many ways. I can't understand anyone who'd want to even go to Australia. I know they deal with it, but like the idea of like anything that skitters across the room could potentially kill you is just weird to me. Whereas in this country, like my fiance has a bit of an irrational, you know, she's got arachnophobia, so I have to deal with spiders. But I mean, I look at them and just go, you know, I don't like. I mean, I think we've got sort of a race memory that makes us wary of things like anything that could be venomous. It's just that's just ingrained into us. Whereas I know they're not that venomous. It's not going to do me any harm. Whereas in Australia, it's like, no, everything could hurt me. And they're everywhere. Because it's so hot, there's shade everywhere. So anywhere, oh no. If only the Tories did only oppose change unless it was a good idea, rather than either opposing them for shits and giggles or taking giant backward steps like Brexit. Yeah, but in that case, they thought it was some good idea. But for their party, that's what I mean. They'll do things that seem to work for their party, not the country, which shows you where their priorities are. Their priorities are never for the country. Alex talking about that. I'm guessing someone asked what taxes they said they would put up. VAT on private school fees, removing business rates relief for private schools. Also applying windfall taxes to oil and gas companies properly and increasing the level. And there was at least another one as well. And I was going to try and look. Let me see if I can find it. Hold on. Because I'm pretty sure there were 3. But we also knew, and I said this in many videos before, Labour had mentioned a few tax increases, and there was always this feeling that they were keeping some hidden. So the Tories, basically, why talk about all the ones you were going to do and give the Tories a chance to sort of cock block you, which is what they attempted to do with that national insurance cut. Hold on, let me find it. It's quite early on the manifesto. So let us have a look. Oh yeah, non-DOMs, getting rid of non-DOM status, which is an effectively taxing. Again, and all of these are tax increases on the wealthy. So you've got, if I look in just their 6 first steps alone, getting rid of non-DOM loopholes, they said. Also cracking down on tax avoidance, but that's not... It technically is, because that's tax avoidance rather than tax evasion. So that will mean removing some tax avoidance schemes. But I'm not sure... So that's technically a tax increase, because if you get rid of tax avoidance schemes, you can't get rid of all of them. But if you can get rid of some tax avoidance schemes, that will effectively have the effect of taxing the rich a bit more. But getting rid of non-dom status is obviously a form of raising taxes. Windfall tax on oil and gas giants. Again, the fact that they're going to apply it more robustly and increase the rate of it as well. And, you know, ending the tax breaks for private schools. And that was on their big banner thing on page 10 of the manifesto, before all the actual manifesto promises. One Angry Pagan saying it's the lynx that's been reintroduced to Scotland, but lynx aren't enough. I'm pretty sure I heard wolves. I'm going to look this up now. I'm pretty sure I heard wolves. Now, I'm not saying... I mean, maybe they introduced them and they all ate each other and then they stopped it. Oh, you may be right. But I've seen... Look, I'm gone. A wolf pack was released. I've just seen a headline saying, as of 2024, Scotland has no plans to reintroduce wolves or other large carnivores. But I also seen a thing of where some wolves were released. But it's obviously not part of a large scale thing. They just introduced some wolves somewhere where people don't live. Phil, I learnt today that in Northern Territory in Australia you can have a crocodile as a pet. Well, why not? I mean, for goodness sake, why not? Australians, I mean, this is the thing, you see, we're polar opposites in terms of our flora and fauna. In Australia, everything is so dangerous. It's probably why they're so laid back. Apart from some things, they do get quite touchy about some things, but that's like any country, isn't it? But they're quite laid, and they must be, because it's just like everything can kill you straight away, which is probably why they're so full of life. Whereas in this country, it's like we eliminated anything dangerous. Like we have, technically there are snakes in this country, like adders. They're not the dangerous sort. You would never need to worry about them. You know, we have some spiders that might give you a nasty nip, but that's about it. You know, basically, if you are killed by British wildlife, it's because you had this really weird allergy, not that the animal itself was particularly deadly. But there we go. But you know, so the idea of changing that, it's like, you know, it's sad that we did it in the first place in a way, but given that it was done, what's done is done. I would tend to keep it that way. And do you know what? If we have got an overpopulation of deer, and yeah, I mean, I'm not, you know, and if people don't want to hunt them, I mean, what I would say is, make it worth their while, make it a commercial operation, because just get people to be interested in venison, right? Venison pate is quite nice. I'm not a huge fan of a lot of game meat, but venison pate is quite nice. Get some of that going. Get people wanting that. Oh, Craig saying you could get trampled by a horse or a cow. Cows more, yeah, cows more serious, actually. That's true. Yeah, cows can be quite nasty. Although it does tend to be, if you get trampled by a cow, I think I'm right in saying statistically, that is generally because you're walking your dog. Don't walk your dog near cows, by the way, unless it's trained. If you're walking your dog near cows, the dog spooks the cows try and trample the dog, and the owner tries to keep hold of the dog. You're advised in that situation to let go of the dog. The dog will outrun the cows, and the cows aren't bothered about you. They're after the dog. And apparently where people do get trampled by cows, I believe a lot of the time it's because the dog has spooked the cows, and then they've held onto the leash of the dog. And so the dog can't outrun the cows, because you can't outrun cows. And which may sound surprising, but unless you're really fast, you can't outrun cows. And you all get trampled together, where you should let the dog go. But there we go. But James has just said there, yeah, never walk dogs around cows and calves. Yeah, absolutely, don't. Not at all. Especially, yeah, when they've got calves about. Do not take a dog there. But nonetheless, in that, I think where you do get people being trampled by cows, that's what does it. But anyway, there we go. We'll leave it there before we go down a really weird road again. Sort of run out of time. Thanks very much for coming on, as always. Be very close. We'll have one more weekend of parliamentary recess, and then they'll be back again for a few weeks, and then it'll be conference season. But yes, one more week. I think probably the next week is the one where most people go on holiday anyway, so it's probably going to be quite quiet. So I don't even know what I will have up next. My wedding is next Thursday. I will try and have at least one video out for Thursday, but given that I think a lot of people go on holiday, we will see. There should be at least one, maybe two. Depends on what news there is. At the moment, there's not very much news. But thanks very much. It says, all the best for Monday, Phil. It's like Thursday. But thank you anyway. I'm fine on Monday. It's Thursday I'm getting married. But have a good evening, everyone. And until next time, I'll see you later.